right.
Jen, I'll
Okay,
turn that over to you. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Shirley. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Youngjin Yoo. I'm a professor at the Weatherhead School of Management, at Case Western Reserve University. And I work with Shirley. I'm a faculty director of xLab. So this is our second quarterly meeting, and we are excited to have you all joining us. I'm going to start sharing my slide to introduce our panelists. We are very excited to have two panelists today joining us. First panelist is Sherry Neubert. She's our own EMBA graduate from 2007. She's currently Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. She has years of experiences of managing large global IT projects and managing incredibly complex IT organizations at really old historic company, but also was deeply involved in some of the exciting digital innovation that Goodyear has successfully executed recent years. So she will be sharing her experience in those projects, as well as her overall IT leadership in this digital era. Our second panelist is Professor Robert Gregory. Some of you overheard him saying that he's in between. So he, I think technically still is a professor at the University of Virginia, the McIntyre School, but he is actually moving to Miami Herbert Business School at University of Miami as an associate professor. Before joining UVA, he was at ISARE in Spain. And Robert has many years of experience of conducting high impact research with many of the leading European manufacturers and their IT leaders, trying to understand some of the challenges and problems that legacy companies face, particularly in the IT roles and IT leaders, as they try to compete in this highly disruptive world. And automotive industry is one of the industries that is incredibly being disrupted. We hear almost every day some kind of news related to mobility service and autonomous vehicles and AIs and electric vehicles and so forth. Both Robert and Sherry have a lot of experiences and knowledge and expertise to share with us on this particular topic. So I'm exceedingly delighted to have them joining us. There's a reason that before we officially welcome them to the panel, I'd like to just share some perspective about why we are choosing this particular topic at this particular time. There are a couple of reasons we are focusing on this topic. The first one is the nature of digital transformation that we see in corporate America in today's world. So many large corporates in America have started digital transformation journey some time ago. I would say, some companies started, maybe 5 years ago, some 3 years ago, and so on, with varying degree of success. Many of these organizations, early adopters, have now accomplished some small wins. Many cases, they are in the form of pilot projects. They have nice looking app. They have MVPs. They have a successful project experiences with experience design, service design. They have some deployment of clouds, and some of them may even have IoT products, smart connected products. Now the main challenge is how do we scale it above and beyond a single project and one-off experience? And this is where exactly the IT leadership is becoming very, very critical. Enterprise IT organizations are the one who used to provide IT services and digital resources at scale, global, in the case of Goodyear tire, for their global operations. And they keep, used to keep them running and safe and reliable and secure. Now, without them being involved some way, it is very challenging for small team who just created an app to deploy it and grow it in a global scale. It is a challenge. So that's one of the reasons. Now I see, IT leaders like Sherry are increasingly involved and being called upon to work with, these agile teams. There are a lot of challenges in dealing with such a project from a traditional IT organization's perspective. So that's one of the reasons. A second reason is that during this pandemic era, a lot of it's not a lot of, all the organizations completely changed the way they operate, and they relied on technologies like a cloud and Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Many of those capabilities were managed and provided by the IT organizations. So as we go back to post-pandemic new normal mode of operations, which will be the reality of digital transformation, and which will accelerate the corporate's efforts to transform using digital technologies. So that will make another sort of reason why the IT leaders need to get involved in the digital transformation. So that's pretty much one of the reasons why I think that the discussion about IT leadership and then IT departments and IT workforces is extremely important and timely in today's digital economy. So with that, the way we will conduct our panel is that I will invite them to briefly introduce themselves, some of the things that they want to talk about in terms of their responsibilities and portfolios. And I have a set of questions that I have prepared to anchor our dialogues here. And after that, we will open up the floor to all the participants to have a Q&A session. Throughout the conversation that we have at the panel, feel free to type up your questions and comments, and we will moderate those and share it with our panelists so that they will have a chance to pick them up and respond to you. So with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and say a few words or opening remarks. So Sherry, would you mind going first?
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. And Youngjin, thank you for the invitation. Robert, it's great to be here with you today as well. Hey, I wanted to just take a quick moment. I wrote down the term you used, old historic, and I wanted to share just a teeny tiny bit about Goodyear. Goodyear is a multinational company. We make and sell our products all over the world, and we were founded in 1898. So it's true, we've been around for a while. We were founded by Frank Seiberling. He named his company after Charles Goodyear, who was a self-taught chemist. And he is the individual who discovered the vulcanization process that makes rubber pliable, waterproof, and moldable. So today we sell over 159 million tires annually. We have over $15.5 billion in revenue, 47 facilities, 21 countries, 64,000 associates. And you also may recognize the Goodyear blimp, which we call our aerial ambassador. It's been an ambassador since 1928. I also wanted to share that in February, we announced our acquisition of Cooper Tires, and I'm excited to say that yesterday the deal closed. And with that deal closing, we now have a combined company revenue of $17.5 billion, 200 million units in annual volume, and 72,000 employees. So you did hear a bit about about Goodyear, and yes, our company was established over 120 years ago, and our IT organization was established in 1959. So over 60 years ago, we brought our first computer systems in, and today we have over 3,000 FTEs that deliver the function of IT at Goodyear. They support over 250,000 people, locations, and devices. And I think it's important to share that, yes, we have been on a journey to globalize since about 2010. We're 60% global, 30% regional, 10% local. I think one of the things that's also important is when we use the words old and historic, we have been innovating and using technology for decades. And that's going to be an important part of this conversation when we share and talk about the polarities that exist when you're an organization that has to build secure and sustainable solutions. Just a little bit about me. I've been Goodyear's CIO for 6 years now. I joined the company 19 years ago as the leader of our business intelligence department in the enterprise data warehouse. So that's my technical specialty, is in the analytics space. I am from Akron, Ohio. I've lived there most of my life with a few exceptions. I'm a wife, a mother, and a grandma. Lifelong learner, love D&I, especially diversity and tech. And I have continued my education. As Youngjin shared, I have my MBA from CASE, also a master's in operations from Ohio State, and I'm currently pursuing a certification from the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. So I love Akron, love my community, love to invest, and really happy and pleased to be here today.
All right, well, thank you, Sherry. Now I'm going to just turn it over to Robert.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Youngjin, for this introduction and inviting me here. It's an honor. So, I've been basically doing work with companies on digital transformation since approximately 10 years now. I started getting into the topic from the traditional perspective within the IT function, IT project, and IT transformation program management. And then I kind of moved to ES, a business school in Spain, and I started working with non-IT executive audiences. I started to broaden my focus to think about digital transformation more holistically from an enterprise-wide perspective, where IT plays an important role, but it doesn't play the only role. And it is actually oftentimes, or most oftentimes, led by the CEO. And so it's kind of a cross-functional, enterprise-wide kind of a transformation challenge that we're dealing with. And so I've been coming from this traditional perspective of IT leadership, but then going into the broader enterprise-wide perspective in my work with companies, especially as I work not only with IT executives, but also with non-IT executives in my executive teaching and with my engagements with companies. And in terms of industry, so Youngjin already mentioned the automotive industry. I've been looking into a major transformation that has been going on for many years, since 20 years or so, the Connected Car Initiative at Volkswagen in Germany. I originally was born in Germany, so I have very close connections to the German industries. But I'm also half American, so I kind of decided to come over to the US 2 years ago. And here, from the US perspective, I've been working with Microsoft on their data-driven transformation in my cooperation with MIT. So I've been gaining insights into the Microsoft data-driven transformation journey. And then going into the Asian continent, I've been looking into the DBS Bank digital transformation journey, which has gained a lot of press and attention over the last years. And so mainly that's kind of like, software, automotive, and maybe banking industry have been kind of my specialty areas. And maybe that's enough as an introduction for now. Yeah.
All right. But the only thing that industry, Robert, that you're missing is healthcare. So we'll get you some healthcare projects over here. So anyway, all right. So with that, great introduction. I'd like to begin by asking you to think about the kind of like an opening question. What is the role of IT leadership, in digital transformation entail? What does that entail? What corporate IT should and should not do for digital transformation, and why does it matter? I'd love to begin with Sherry. This is your day-to-day challenge and activity, and would you want to tackle this first, and then we'll ask Robert to chime in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is a sticky question. And I get asked this question in all different forms by all different audiences. And I have come up with my succinct answer, which is focus on the true north. And what I mean by that is focus on enterprise outcomes, regardless of what team or entity delivers the solutions. So, like I said, my default answer is whatever the company needs from us, that's our role, whether it's end-to-end fulfillment of the full digital lifecycle, or it's providing part of the solution. The most important thing is that Goodyear gets access to the technology, regardless of where the solution comes from. Now, that being said, officially, we have some goals within IT of where we think our sweet spot is, and that's evolved over time. So where we are today, we are the trusted technology advisors. We are end-to-end business process integrators. We want to be the central source for a secure software development lifecycle, where we're accelerating solutions, secure solutions with a digital tool chain. So that's our goal. That's where we want to be. We strive to be those trusted technology advisors, and there's a lot of polarities too, which I know we're going to talk about. We want the right solutions at the right time. We want to balance, rock solid delivery with rapid experimentation, and we want to balance efficiency and abundance and growth. And so when I see what should that be for IT, I can tell you, and I know we're going to talk about this, that it took us a while to get there because we were so used to being the entity that provided technology solutions. We wanted to be that entity. We wanted to be it for everyone. And we had to really realize that it's for everyone. I mean, technology development, it should be available and accessible. And as long as the company itself is getting access to the technology, it really doesn't matter where it comes from. IT's job is to provide those sustainable, scalable, secure solutions.
Robert, you talked to many different companies. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what Sherry says, and it connects to a big observation that I made across different companies, which is basically a shift from the paradigm of enterprise IT to the paradigm of everyone's IT. And there are fundamentally different views associated with each one of those two. So going into the past, the traditional view of enterprise IT has been that IT is affordable. It is not affordable. It is expensive. It is not accessible. It is complex, right? So the kind of view that workers and users and companies have with enterprise IT solutions is that it is not easy to use and etc. And now over the last 10, 15 years, companies have been confronted with very different paradigm, the paradigm where technology is, as Sherry says, for everyone, where it's easy to use, it's enjoyable, it's accessible, it can be, it's open, it's not closed, it provides you with flexibility, it doesn't control you. And so this is a huge paradigm shift. And it's you also see that when you think about the IT industry globally, like IT companies nowadays make more money with consumers than they make with enterprises. And this transition of the IT industry making more money with the consumers, that shift happened approximately 10 years ago. And that trend is accelerating, which means that the technology that people have at home and the technology that people bring to work is oftentimes as powerful, if not even more powerful than the technology they are being given by their corporate IT functions within the workplace. And so I think that if we think about this fundamental shift, it has many, many implications. It has implications, for example, what Sherry says about facilitating and enabling enterprise outcomes. So to focus on the ends as opposed to focusing on the technological means. So the ends come first, right? We need to solve customer problems and enterprise problems. And we need to take that outside in that business and customer perspective. And from that perspective, we then need to see which kind of combination of technological means, whether it's internal technologies, external technologies that we need in order to, which combination of technologies we need in order to address those ends, right? But the focus is an outside-in focus and not an inside-out focus. And it's definitely not technology-driven, but it's problem-solution driven. And so that reflects in the way that IT leadership nowadays works with business leadership, the way that folks from the IT function work hand in hand as part of embedded teams spread out across different parts of the company, as opposed to the past where you were working in silos. And so And I think that, so if we just embrace this consumerization of IT and this everyone's IT kind of paradigm, if we just embrace that, that's very challenging for IT leadership, because to some extent it involves giving up control. And giving up certain levels of influence and power. It means empowering the users of technology, giving them more direct access. And I think that's also something that Sherry mentioned based on her experience. And so it involves a different approach to how you govern IT and how you structure and deliver IT within the company. So one IT leader who I talked to, a very senior IT leader in Deutsche Bank back in the days when I was still in Germany, he said kind of like, if this transformation goes well the way that I envision it, it means that I'm taking away large parts of my responsibilities, of the groups that I am overseeing. So I'm kind of taking away control from myself if this transformation goes according to my vision, right? So embracing this everyone's IT mindset means that IT becomes transversal. It's no longer just a function. And that's a huge shift.
So it's just reflecting upon both of your comments. It just two thoughts came to my mind. One is the IT. If you look back, historically, the evolution of corporate IT function, this kind of transition has happened before, a few times. So in 80s when PCs came in, we had the term called end user computing, right? And we thought that was a big deal. That's an end of IT function. Guess what? It didn't end the IT function. IT leadership became even more important, right? Now we have a different kind of IT resources. Now it is all about internet and client server architecture and so on. And then the cloud came in, then utility came in. People like Nicholas Carr, IT doesn't matter, and guess what? And IT matters even more, but in a different way, right? So I think it is important that, we kind of think about it. We have seen this change. What is unique and different this time? I think being very strategic about it, I think it's important. In my view, there are two things that are uniquely different this time. One is that IT, never before, the IT is now being deeply integrated into direct control over the consumers, end users, right? And that exposes all kinds of issues. And there's a question about ransomware. We are all aware of that. And it's just one example. So on one hand, it is exciting that the technology is now being part of the most exciting, like in my view, like innovations and changes and creating new products and services. And IT used to be really deep in the back door, back office and in the basements and so on. And now it is really forefront of the organization, right? So that's interesting. That second part, I think, just building on Robert, your point, I'm doing a project with a global consumer electronics, leading company, and they are now completely rethink their consumer electronics products, TVs, for example, as a work device, work from home, and so and when you put your IT leadership role, so someone is working at home and the work will be done by his smart TV at home. How do you control that, right? It's a completely different world. It's one thing to control someone's iPhone, but it's another one to control someone's living room and the TV set, right? So I think it's an interesting world, and I think this chapter has not finished yet. I think we're just turning the chapter, and I think we will have a lot more. Do you guys have any other thoughts before we move on to the next question that I have prepared?
Yeah, I would like to respond to that, Youngjin, because I think there's something that is fundamentally different from the 1980s and 1990s, when we already had some kind of an end user revolution, because that end user revolution happened within the boundaries of the company. It happened in the relationship between the workers and the managers. And at the end of the day, the managers, obviously within a hierarchical, within organization setting, had the upper hand. And that end user revolution didn't really lead anywhere like long term. But then what happened was that now it is expanded to the triangle of the consumer, the manager, and the worker. And any worker has become a consumer worker. Any worker has become a consumer who grows up, who lives with digital technology in the pocket and in the daily life, and expectations and behaviors of the worker are shaped by the experiences as consumers with digital technologies in everyday life. And so now you have consumer customers who are demanding new kinds of experiences, new kinds of services. They demand new things because of their experiences with digital technology in their everyday life. And you have workers who demand new things, but also they are empowered. They feel empowered that they could do so. There are so many opportunities for innovation, for creating new products, for serving the customer in a different way. But now they are really demanding to be empowered by their managers as well, right? Because ultimately the consumer workers are serving the consumer customers. And so that's where, you're gonna get growth. You're gonna get, and Sherry talked about the balancing act. And I fully agree with Sherry. The key challenge for IT leadership is managing this balancing act. On the one hand, keeping the lights on, the efficiency, the security. That's obviously, that's the homework. That's the baseline. If you don't do that well, there's not going to be any digital transformation. However, you need to also have the free up the resources in order to invest in the growth, in the innovation on the customer side of things, the new products, the new services, the new experiences. And that's where you need your consumer workers to serve the consumer customer and to obtain new resources from the environment, data resources and other kinds of resources that are very valuable for value creation and capture. So that's the new dynamic. This triangle of relationships. The consumer was not in the mix 20 years ago because we didn't have the everyone's IT revolution.
Great. Thanks. So let's move on to the next topic. We have a few more to cover. So Sherry, I'm going to put you on a spot here. So as you face this new challenge, what is your single biggest challenge that you face? And how have you overcame that challenge? If you could share your insight story.
Yeah, I think there's probably two, and maybe we're going to come shortly to the just the role of IT. But if I just think about as a CIO, and I reflect back to 6 years ago, the biggest challenge that I saw was the risk of obsolescence. And what I mean by that is, we had a technology organization that had largely outsourced a lot of the development, whether it was the latest development, mobile development. So the outsourcing, almost the shift left, as we call it, had almost gone too far. And what I found is that I had highly capable people in my organization who were really good at being project managers and who were really good at creating an architecture, but they may not have kept up to date on the latest technology. And so we really had to look at our organization. We had to start insourcing. We were really wanted to be a lot more thoughtful about what went out and what went in terms of building capability. We ended up creating an IT functional competency model where we said, these are the technologies, the emerging spaces where we want everyone within IT to have a base kind of 101 level knowledge across all of these competencies. So that risk of obsolescence, and I said it's more around the technical obsolescence, was my observation 6 years ago. And I'm very proud to say that we've invested in our people over the years, and they are, yes, they're still great project managers. Yes, they've learned about how to be Scrum Masters, and they've been trained on Agile, and they've built up their internal technical capability as well. So that's I would say the challenge that I'm most proud of us overcoming these last years.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Robert, what are some of the other challenges you saw came across from your own research?
So first of all, I I fully agree with Sherry there. I've seen that also in other companies. It goes hand in hand with that recognition of the shifting role of IT as an integral part of new value creation, of innovation, of experimentation, etc., that we have been talking about in this panel so far. And so I think that that requires, of course, an adaptation in the way that you source, that you manage, that you provide IT internally as becoming more integral to delivering the enterprise outcomes. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think what I'm also seeing is that alongside with these shifts that we're seeing is the transformation of IT governance away from a traditional functional approach to governance which is based on the hierarchical functional structures, the traditional idea that IT leaders control the usage of IT within the company in order to align with the strategic goals and objectives, toward a platform-based governance approach that we kind of know from platform ecosystems. So borrowing a little bit the principles of governance from this platform world and trying to bring that into the company, because that helps you to spread IT, to democratize access to IT, to make it more directly available to those agile teams. So Sherry talks about those agile teams, right? Those agile teams want to be agile. They want to be able to access building blocks in a very direct manner, in an unbureaucratic manner, because established routines, inflexible established routines, the bureaucracy, so to speak, holds you back in being agile and fast in the digital transformation, right? And so you need to overcome that kind of rigidity. And how do you do that? Well, part of it is transforming from a functional approach to governance to a platform-based approach. And alongside that is, of course, a changing way in which business leaders fund the IT function, and the way that the financing, the allocation of resources, the processes and the principles according to which that happens has to also change alongside that, right? So you start funding outcomes and teams as opposed to the traditional yearly budget, because that's kind of based on the old assumption that IT is just for the back end, as Youngjin says, way in the back and just responsible for automating business processes, right? So with this new role of IT that is much more much more customer centric, much more market facing, you also have to change the whole governance approach to IT. And that's a huge cultural shift, because that requires convincing business leaders of dealing with IT leadership in a very different way, establishing a very different kind of a contract and relationship.
Can I, Youngjin, do you mind if I add and tell just another kind of story, I think, that builds on where Robert was going? If I think back to some of the challenges that we had, specifically around our digital innovation, I would say, even with our best efforts as a company to set up the teams and the processes for digital innovation, and specifically around our new ventures, around really a move to digital products, we researched, we read all the books, we brought all the speakers in. I remember the book, The Other Side of Innovation, and it taught us how to build teams that, would be able to execute on innovation. And, so we went through all these processes and we iterated multiple times, and we started with the standalone, fully independent teams that would do innovation. And then we thought, okay, well, now they need to scale, and this needs, they need some security feedback. And so we developed some RACI models that would tell us how the innovation teams would work with the IT teams. And we iterated a little bit more there. And to build on the point that Robert said, we ultimately ended up with two things. One is outcome-based mindset. So it's not about, really specific, the RACI models, or, the kind of the friction that we might've had, but it really was, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And then who's accountable for that outcome? And so we just, we said IT will secure and operationalize, we will scale and sustain. And it's an outcome versus, a, kind of the tug and pull that we had previously. I think that is, a really big part of what we were, hoping to achieve. And I think the other part is the kind of scalability of these tool chains, we call them. So the idea that we want to provide a framework, we want to provide like a standard, kind of DevOps tool chain that is central and available. It's for software delivery. It's a self-service platform. It's the Goodyear kind of like reusable open source community. We wanted to be able to provide this central stopping point where anyone, whether they were working on an external digital product or an internal product, could come and reuse this kind of tool chain in this platform. So I think we eventually had to get to this place to really think about outcomes, that we're focused on outcomes, and we want to ensure that everyone is having, access to the technology, and it's not kind of the friction that you would have between functions.
So, if I use an analogy, it's almost like, we used to have a separate group whose job is dealing with international global business. Nowadays, like a global business, pretty much almost every department's role and job and its capability that is infused throughout the entire organization. But someone needs to set the tone of how do we go about doing international collaborations and international partnerships and so on. So I think that's where the technology is also coming to play, right? We are coming to a point where information technology is now becoming even more so than ever before part of our everyday activities. Everyone is involved. So IT is not just IT functions role, but IT needs to enable, and in a consistent way that, and then people can resonate with one another as they use their own tools, right? So it's not like one-off, a lot of different frictions. So, the corporate governance and standards are not necessarily as a way of constraining and limiting what people are able to do, but enabling them, right? So I like to think of this type of way of, the IT governance as a language. Language is, obviously, it says, what you can and cannot do, but it allows us to communicate. It allows us to build on each other. And I think that's how I would love to take a look at this, the new kind of roles and governances we think about as we move deeper into the digital economy. Sherry, I'd like to turn to you one more time here. One of the success stories, rare success stories, I might say, of a legacy company doing digital innovation is Go by Goodyear. And it was announced right before the pandemic last year, right? And I know that the work is continuing and expanding, and it was led by the innovation team. But your team played a very important role in coming to the concept and launching and enabling and all of that. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective. Maybe you can share what Go is and what the strategic intent is, and Goodyear Ventures and all that. But particularly focusing on the IT leadership role, the corporate IT, and how you play your role and your team. And so I think that'll be a really interesting case study.
Yeah, I think you said it. We have an innovation organization within Goodyear that has historically been responsible for our products, and our products have been physical products. They've been tires, right? Every tire you can imagine, it's this physical product. And as we think back to 2010, we were the first tire company to sell our products direct to consumer online. So we had this first kind of digital product, which was the selling online. But then if we go to 2018, there were initiatives to start to think about new business models, and those new business models being part of our innovation organization. And now our innovation organization is interested in looking into technology and into development, and it seems to be overlapping with the role that the IT organization has played. Now, we never called them digital products, but we were supporting fleets, and we were supporting these, this web interaction that we had in the B2B and B2C space. And now we've got this innovation organization that also is, starting to build out quote unquote digital products. And so, as a company, as I said, we did a lot of research on how to build teams. We built innovation labs that are located in Silicon Valley, in Akron and other locations. We started the Goodyear the Ventures organization, where we were doing some funding, and we built these teams out, and the teams were fully independent from the IT organization. And a lot of that was by design, because we had this mindset that what got you here won't get you there. We really believed that the people who sustained this company over 100 years, this mindset that we have that's really efficiency focused, it's really process focused, that organization, those people weren't necessarily the ones to innovate. And what we found ultimately is that we need both. That we need the innovators who are going to, focus on the discovery and the incubation and iterating back and forth and being very experimenting and open to risk and to failure and failing fast. We needed all of those types of mindsets. And when it came down to, we've got a product and now we want to scale that product and operationalize it, we also need the people who are good at the process, who know how to secure the environment, who can scale things out to the enterprise level. And so we ultimately came, again, after many years of iterating and working on how we were going to govern and co-govern, we ultimately got to a place where and I like the term that Robert says, everyone's IT, because we got to the place where there was a place for everyone. And it was no longer about my thing or your thing, it's what's Goodyear's thing and what's good for the company. And I think we ultimately got there. It was bumpy sometimes, for sure. Certainly people who've been in the function of IT for 20 or 30 years felt threatened that, hey, this is my space and now someone else is over there. And that's where I said that sticky question, because I would get this question all the time. What do you think about that team doing IT? Is that shadow IT? Is this thing, that thing? And I would always start by saying, I'm so glad that someone in Goodyear is doing this for our company, right? That's the first thing. The most important thing is that we have access to this technology, that we're able to capitalize on it, that we're able to build products that meet our customers' needs. That's the most important thing. And then we can figure out the behind the scenes of who does what. And, and we can figure out the governance and make sure everything's secure and scalable. So that, a lot of great collaboration, Aaron Springs leading that organization from an innovation point of view. Simone Gabinelli has been instrumental in the work that he's led to help facilitate that. Jim Eichner is no longer with us, but he was there at the beginning. And so just a lot of people who really wanted the outcome and kept pushing and pushing and really stretching us to think about how we operate and how we can innovate and truly execute innovation.
I'm sure that was an easy journey. And, I want to share a little bit of research that I am completing. Actually, the research was done mostly by my colleagues in Germany. They have this data set, large scale survey, where they look at the performance of the company and the IT deviance. So here, what we mean by IT deviance is that business units are ignoring corporate enterprise sort of like a standard and policy, creating so-called shadow IT. And in general, the result is unambiguous that it is a bad idea. It actually reduces the performance of a firm. But in rare cases, the deviance actually turn out to be a positive. And these are conditions where, under the conditions where the environment is extremely dynamic, and business, the environment is uncertain. And so the business unit has to move in a very agile way. And I think this is exactly the kind of space where, the innovation digital service model, new business model, we don't know what is going to work, and we need to move very fast. We need to constantly create new things. And so, I think it is interesting that there is some research with a fairly large sample that backs up your instinct, in this particular space. So I thank you so much for sharing your story here. Robert, I want to turn it to you now. This is something that you and I have been talking about, and I heard you saying about a digital mindset quite a bit that is necessary. So can you spend a few minutes talking about what it is and why it matters? What companies can do to nurture it in among their IT employees or everybody, I guess. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So maybe just very briefly and quickly before I go into that question, just to respond to Sherry's great example. So something very similar we see at Volkswagen, right? In the connected car innovation trajectory at Volkswagen over the last 20 years, they have been experiencing these kind of shifts where initially they were trying to do digital product innovation out of the established functions, including the IT function. That didn't work. Then they kind of separated it and they created all these digital labs. In Munich, there was a data lab. In Silicon Valley, they created a lab. And so they had all these labs. And so they tried to kind of separate it out. And ultimately, going to Sherry's point, they realized that they needed both, right? They needed these new digital agile teams, these innovation teams. They needed some degree of separation, but they also needed integration. And they achieved the integration by creating a movement. They called it almost like a meta-organizational structure that spans these these new separated labs on the one hand and the established mother organization on the other hand, and they created this meta structure where they created a shared culture, a shared mindset, and they kind of apart from the shared purpose and the shared mindset that they created at the cultural level, they also created shared interfaces, so that basically at the technical level, it would be that the digital team innovation teams would be building upon building blocks that would be already existent, that would be already safe and secure, that would be already regulated, that would be already compliant, and they would kind of build upon that both for efficiency and for security and compliance and scalability reasons, right? I just wanted to kind of respond to Sherry's example there with just another example there, and then going into the digital mindset. I think the digital mindset is at the core of the cultural transformation, and it's really, I think, the first dimension of a digital mindset is really related to what we discussed with the consumer orientation. So from an identity perspective, do you identify with company resources? Like, for example, a typical IT, traditional IT professional, this is my system, this is my baby, as opposed to, I identify with actual business and customer problems, and we have this shared identification around these problems, that these business outcomes that we want to achieve, and we kind of group and identify around those, right? So this outside in orientation, that's a huge identity shift. Second of all, it's the shift toward learning orientation, right? And so one way to think about this is that traditionally, let's take data as an example, right? Data traditionally has been viewed as an enterprise resource that exists internally, that is safe and secure, that is kind of controlled by the enterprise IT function. And basically, we gather that from transactional systems. And so we have this internal view of data. Now the learning orientation view is very much this idea that we nowadays can source a lot of data externally from the connected consumer, from the customer, and from the connected product, right? And so we can basically source this external data, and that can be a source of learning and new insights. And then I think Sherry made a good point earlier. It can ultimately help you to develop new business model idea, new value propositions, right? And so that learning orientation, it is associated with this very different view of data as a source of learning and insights development, as opposed to just a resource that is to be exploited in the short term for short-term economic gain, right? And then the third dimension is really this idea of agile execution that Sherry already talked about. Like, that's also part of the digital mindset, and that goes hand in hand with iterativeness and incrementality. And I think it's very easy for people to understand how does Scrum work and how do you do agile, but it's very hard to actually embrace the underlying principles of incrementality, of iterativeness, and of collaboration that are underlying the agile philosophy, and to really embrace that, not just in the development of IT solutions, but in the development of new business opportunities more generally, and bring IT and business together to work in this agile mindset, right? And I could go on and on. So there are like 3 other dimensions that I could talk about, but I'll just stop here to pause and to allow for some reflection and discussion. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so I will do a shameless plug here. If you want to know more about those 3 more additional dimensions, join the xLab as a member, and then we'll share that with you. Just kidding. No, we are actually running out of time. We only have 10 minutes, and we have about 5 questions, and I anticipate that there may be more questions coming once we open the floodgate. So I'm going to invite people to type in their questions here, and maybe, Robert, if you don't mind, Sherry, I'd like to turn our attention to some of these questions and see if we could answer some of those. I'd like to start with the very first one. I think it is an important question. The business school professors love to talk about big corporations, and Goodyear is big and Volkswagen is big. Even though it is a difficult journey, they have resources to weather through the storm and challenges. What about small, medium-sized enterprises with a small IT staff and legacy IT tools? What advice can you share with them? Any thoughts, Sherry, Robert? Sherry, I know that you are involved in regional CIO working group, and I'm sure that you meet with a lot of colleagues who work for smaller, companies. Any tips, any suggestions that
Yeah, I
you?
mean, I think the suggestion that I would make is to at least draw a line in the sand and make a because I noticed the question is specifically around tackling legacy issues. And
Right.
by the way, we have to tackle legacy issues, whether it's, mainframe elimination, Lotus Notes elimination, homegrown AS400 apps that we're running, and so we have a whole category for legacy issues. And one of the ways we tackle them is we talk about the risk associated with them, so that we help our business understand the risk of legacy. And so I think that if we position things in terms of what is the risk to the enterprise, it helps build a business case for change. And even a smaller organization might have legacy issues that could have a business case for change because there's a risk associated with the legacy. So I think kind of bundling those together. And then I would also say, don't be afraid to draw a line in the sand and just agree that we're going to do the new way going forward. Because I think for us, particularly when it came to Lotus Notes and our 365 environment, for years, every year we would evaluate, should we move, should we move, should we move? And there were all of these stranded costs associated with moving. And so we couldn't make the case to move. And what we did is we held our organization back and we didn't adopt the 365. I mean, we eventually adopted it in 2013, 14. We could have adopted it earlier, but we were afraid of that legacy risk. And so we ultimately did adopt. And we carry the risk of legacy as well as getting access to the new technology. And I think that's the most important thing is if you draw a line in the sand, you get access to the new technology while you in parallel manage the legacy risk and the legacy change.
Robert, you want to add anything? Should we move?
I mean, I think one thing that I could add perhaps is, I mean, of course, there are security concerns that have to be taken into account, et cetera, et cetera. However, I do think that smaller companies and IT teams should try to embrace as much as possible the kind of the open, the external, the open, the consumer kind of technologies that are out there, because they are more efficient, right? They are more easily accessible. So to try to be innovative in the selection and use of technologies, of course, considering the traditional concerns for security, etc. But I do think that, as a small company, you need to try to borrow some of the principles of how a startup works,
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a related question. How do you work with an IT leader? I think he or she is thinking of a very specific person. How do you work with an IT leader who has built legacy systems for 20 years toward digital transformation? Any suggestion, conversation starter with very traditional IT leader who has been working with the legacy system? Any tips?
I think there's such a pride of ownership that comes with any of us that have created something. And so I think that, playing to that pride of ownership about owning the next thing. Mm-hmm. Right. What if their legacy is that they owned that transformation and that they led that transformation or they supported it. And so I think it's really playing on that pride of ownership that we all have when we're a creator.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that idea. Yeah. Robert?
Yeah, I think that we're getting to the cultural challenge of managing the transformation process. And the first dimension is always the hardware, right? Winning the hearts of the people to buy into the vision for the transformation, the need for the transformation, and to support that transformation vision, right? And so the first thing that needs to be communicated through by showing empathy and by helping to define a new role is really is really to send out that message that you are more important in the future, not less important, right? Mm-hmm. It requires change and adaptation. But we all know that without IT, for example, new product innovations are not scalable, are not safe and secure, are not going to be compliant, it's not going to be sustainable. So there are so many reasons why to believe that IT is becoming more important, not less important. So it's just about taking away that let's say being afraid of the change, taking away that, dealing with that, and that starts with the hardware.
So I'd like to take the next question related. We talked about one person, but now you're talking about training others. We talked a little bit about it, but this is pretty specific. So the thinking about modern ways of working in age of digital, lean, agile, DevOps, etc. How have you thought about helping people learn, tackle them all at once, focus on one group, grow into another, each team assess their own needs? How do you do this? Like a training, like a large group of people.
Yeah.
What is the experience, Sherry, that you want to share?
I think a couple things I want to share. One is I do feel that the role of the IT organization, yes, we need to listen and understand the corporate strategy and goals, and we need to ingest and assimilate technology so that we can bring the right tools to bear. I think we have an obligation to educate and to raise the digital acumen of the enterprise. So I do believe that we have that obligation. When it comes to the digital acumen or the technical acumen within the function of IT, we have developed, as I said, this framework where we have 6 focus areas: end-to-end business process integration, risk management and continuity, data architecture and digital enablement, technical insight and advising, innovation and continuous improvement, solution development and configuration. And within each of those areas are courseworks and skills that need to be built. And what we ask is we ask our associates to build their acumen as it's appropriate for the role that they're in or the role that they want to be in. And so the whole framework is there, the courses are there, they work individually to do a self-assessment and then build their internal capability. In some cases, we did it at the enterprise. So 2 years ago, we trained every person in IT on Agile 101. So there were some things where we just felt like everyone needs to have it. And then there are other things that we say, depending on your current role or your future role, you might need to be at a 101 or a 401 level.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. There are so many other questions here. I think we can get to all of them. Unfortunately, I think some of the questions were addressed during our earlier conversations. I'm going to take Simone's question to our, private discussion as the opening discussion for, at the end, at the top of the hour with our members and guests. I'd like to, first of all, thank all the audience who came here, and share your, 1 hour in this afternoon, getting a little bit hot and muggy here in Cleveland. But I hope that this was a useful time, and you got something useful. I learned a lot from our panelists today. And also, just as a reminder, if you want to learn anything more about xLab, feel free to send an email to xlab@case.edu. We also have a upcoming Digital Futures Conference in the fall. Some of these topics will be covered with the industry leaders. It'll be very hands-on, and some of the workshops that we will be leading there. We're going to have summer pause, and then we'll come back in the September, I believe, for the third xLab quarterly meeting, third quarter xLab quarterly meeting. Until then, I hope all of you have a safe and fun and also productive summer. And then we'll see you in 3 months. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to thank Robert and Sherry for joining us. And I'll see you guys in a few minutes.
All right. Thank you. See you soon.